Marcus Chen had always believed in loyalty. For 7 years, he'd poured his soul into Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized tech consulting firm that specialized in cybersecurity implementations. He'd joined as a junior developer straight out of college, working 16-hour days, sleeping in his car during crunch periods, and slowly climbing the ranks to become their lead systems architect. He wasn't just an employee, he was the backbone of their most critical operations. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The irony wasn't lost on him that his expertise in security systems would become the very weapon of his revenge. It was a Tuesday morning in November when everything changed. Marcus arrived at the office with his usual black coffee and a head full of solutions for the Morrison Industries project, their biggest client, worth nearly $2 million annually. He'd spent the weekend architecting a revolutionary security framework that would save Morrison both time and money while providing unprecedented protection for their financial data. "Marcus, could you step into my office?" The voice belonged to Janet Winters, the newly appointed VP of Operations who joined the company 6 months ago. She was a corporate climber with an MBA from Wharton and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Marcus had always sensed she saw him as a threat. Too knowledgeable, too indispensable, too comfortable with the old guard. "Sure thing, Janet. Actually, I've got some exciting updates on the Morrison project. The new security protocols I designed over the weekend will—" "That won't be necessary," Janet interrupted, gesturing to a chair across from her pristine desk. HR Representative Sarah Kim sat in the corner, clutching a manila folder like a lifeline. "Please, sit down." The next 10 minutes passed in a surreal blur. Words like restructuring, budget constraints, and new direction floated through the air like smoke. But the message was crystal clear. Marcus Chen, after 7 years of dedication, was being terminated. Effective immediately. Security would escort him out within the hour. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "I'm the lead architect on Morrison Blackstone and the Henderson Group projects. Those implementations are scheduled to go live next month. Who's going to—" "We'll manage," Janet said coldly. "Brad Hutchins will be taking over your responsibilities." Brad Hutchins. The thought hit Marcus like a physical blow. Brad was Janet's nephew, a recent graduate with a computer science degree and exactly 18 months of experience. He was competent enough, but taking over Marcus's projects would be like asking a medical student to perform brain surgery. "Brad doesn't know the Morrison architecture," Marcus protested. "The security frameworks I've built are complex, integrated systems, without proper documentation and transition time." "That's no longer your concern," Sarah Kim spoke up, sliding a FIA severance packet across the desk. "You'll receive 2 weeks' pay, and your health insurance will continue through the end of the month." 2 weeks. 7 years reduced to 2 weeks' pay. As security escorted him to his desk to collect his personal belongings, Marcus felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. Some looked shocked, others sympathetic, but most just looked away, the universal response of survivors in a corporate purge. His hands shook slightly as he packed his coffee mug, a few books, and the small cactus his daughter had given him for his birthday. "Hey man, what's happening?" Tony Rivera, one of the senior developers, approached cautiously. Tony and Marcus had worked countless late nights together, debugging code and solving impossible problems. "Restructuring," Marcus said quietly, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "Take care of yourself, Tony." The drive home was a haze. Marcus sat in his driveway for nearly an hour, staring at his modest suburban house, wondering how he'd explain this to his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. Emma's piano lessons. Sarah's part-time job at the library wouldn't cover their expenses. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a cold, calculating fury that surprised him with its intensity. Because Marcus Chen wasn't just any employee. He was the architect of Pinnacle's entire security infrastructure. He knew every system, every password protocol, every vulnerability, and every strength. More importantly, he knew exactly how fragile their current setup really was. That evening, over a dinner that tasted like cardboard, Marcus broke the news to his family. Sarah's face went through a range of emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a fierce protectiveness that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her. "They made a mistake," she said simply, "and they're going to realize it soon." If only she knew how prophetic those words would be. The first domino fell on Thursday morning. Marcus was at his kitchen table, laptop open, half-heartedly scrolling through job listings when his phone buzzed with a text from Tony. "Dude, the Morrison system crashed. Brad's freaking out. Any chance you could—" Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. By Friday afternoon, the texts were coming in waves. First from Tony, then from other colleagues, then from supervisors he'd barely spoken to in years. The Morrison system wasn't just crashed, it was completely corrupted. The security protocols Marcus had spent months developing were failing one by one, like a house of cards collapsing in slow motion. "Morrison's threatening to pull their contract," Tony's latest message read. "Janet's in full panic mode. Brad admitted he doesn't understand your architecture. Please, Marcus, just a quick call." The irony was delicious. Marcus had built those systems to be virtually unbreakable from the outside. But he'd also built them with a very specific type of maintenance in mind. Maintenance that required not just technical knowledge, but an intimate understanding of the philosophical approach he'd taken to cybersecurity. Brad Hutchins, for all his academic credentials, didn't have the years of experience necessary to see the forest for the trees. More importantly, Marcus had built in certain safeguards that required regular maintenance. Maintenance that only he knew how to perform. He'd always planned to document these processes thoroughly, but with his sudden termination, that knowledge remained locked in his head. By Sunday, the situation had escalated beyond anything Marcus had imagined. "Sarah, you need to see this," his wife called from the living room, where she was watching the local news. Pinnacle Solutions, a local tech consulting firm, is facing a potential data breach that could affect thousands of clients, the news anchor was saying. Sources close to the company report that multiple security systems have failed simultaneously, raising concerns about the safety of sensitive financial and personal information. Marcus felt a moment of genuine alarm. He'd expected system failures, maybe some downtime and frustrated clients. But a data breach? That suggested something far more serious than simple maintenance failures. His phone rang. Janet Winters. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Marcus!" Her voice was strained, desperate, a far cry from the cold confidence of a week ago. "Thank God you picked up. We need to talk." "Do we?" Marcus kept his voice neutral. "Look, I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but we're facing a crisis here. The Morrison system isn't just down, it's compromised. Someone's actively attacking our infrastructure, and Brad thinks it might be related to your security protocols." "My security protocols were designed to prevent attacks, not enable them," Marcus replied calmly. I know. But Marcus, we need your help. The board is meeting tomorrow morning, and if we can't resolve this—" Her voice cracked slightly. "Please, name your price." Marcus hung up, but Janet's call had planted a seed of concern. If someone was actively attacking Pinnacle's systems, that changed everything. Marcus had wanted to see the company struggle, maybe lose a few clients, face some consequences for their callous treatment of him. But an actual cyber attack could destroy people's lives. Employees who'd done nothing wrong, clients whose data could be stolen, families whose financial information could be compromised. He spent Sunday night diving into the company's systems remotely. It wasn't technically legal, but Marcus still had legitimate access to several monitoring systems, access that HR had apparently forgotten to revoke in their haste to escort him out. What he found made his blood run cold. Someone was indeed attacking Pinnacle's infrastructure, but it wasn't an external threat. The attack patterns, the specific vulnerabilities being exploited, the methodical way the security systems were being dismantled, it all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the company's architecture. Someone like Marcus himself. By Monday morning, the picture became crystal clear. Brad Hutchins, in his panic and inexperience, had been making increasingly desperate attempts to fix the failing systems. Each fix created new vulnerabilities, and each vulnerability was being exploited by someone who understood exactly how the architecture worked. The digital fingerprints pointed directly to Marcus's credentials and access patterns. Someone was framing him for cyber attacks on his former company. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Not only had Pinnacle fired him without cause, but now someone was using his termination as cover for a systematic attack on the company's infrastructure. When the authorities inevitably investigated, all the evidence would point to the disgruntled former employee who'd been unceremoniously fired just days before the attacks began. It was a perfect setup. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your revenge, Marcus? Don't worry, I'll make sure you get all the credit you deserve. A friend." His hands were shaking as he called Tony Rivera. "Tony, I need you to listen very carefully," Marcus said without preamble. "Someone is attacking Pinnacle's systems and framing me for it. I need you to look at the system logs from the past 72 hours and tell me who's been making administrative changes." "Marcus, man, I can't just—" "Tony, if I go down for this, it won't just be criminal charges. It'll be federal cybercrime charges. Prison time. My family will be destroyed. Please." There was a long pause. "Give me 10 minutes. When Tony called back, his voice was tight with worry. "Marcus, this is bad. The logs show your credentials being used, but the access patterns, they're too perfect, too systematic, like someone's following a script." "Who else has been making changes?" "That's the thing. It's just you and Brad in the logs, but Brad's been in meetings with Janet and the board most of the weekend. He couldn't have been running these attacks." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Tony, I need you to check something else. Look at the original termination order that HR processed. Who initiated it?" "Marcus, please." Another pause, longer this time. "Jesus, Marcus. The termination request wasn't initiated by Janet. It came from the IT department. From Brad Hutchins." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Brad hadn't just been incompetent, he'd been calculating. As Janet's nephew, he'd had her ear, but he'd needed Marcus out of the way to take over the lead architect position. The attacks weren't random chaos. They were a carefully orchestrated plan to discredit Marcus while simultaneously creating a crisis that only Brad could heroically solve. But Brad had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the complexity of Marcus's systems. His attacks had spiraled out of control, creating real vulnerabilities that actual external hackers were now exploiting. What had started as a frame job had become a genuine catastrophe. Marcus spent Monday afternoon building his defense. He documented every legitimate system access he'd made since his termination, cross-referenced his physical location with the attack timestamps, and most importantly, analyzed the attack patterns to identify the subtle signatures that proved they weren't his work. But he also did something else, something that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew Marcus Chen. He began to fix the problems. Working through secure channels and using legitimate recovery protocols he'd established years earlier, Marcus began systematically closing the vulnerabilities that the attacks had created. He couldn't prevent the investigation that was surely coming, but he could minimize the damage to innocent people. By Tuesday morning, Pinnacle's systems were not only stable but more secure than they'd been in months. Marcus had essentially rebuilt their entire security infrastructure overnight, creating new protocols that were immune to the attack patterns Brad had been using. His phone rang at 6 a.m. Janet again. "Marcus, I don't know how you did it, but thank you," she said, and for the first time she sounded genuinely human. "The systems are running perfectly. Morrison's happy, the board is calm, and we dodged a bullet with the media." "Janet, we need to meet," Marcus said. "All of us. You, me, Brad, and HR. There are some things you need to know about what really happened this week." The conference room at Pinnacle Solutions felt surreal. Marcus hadn't set foot in the building since his termination 8 days ago, but here he was, sitting across from the people who'd destroyed his career, holding the evidence that would destroy one of theirs. Brad Hutchins looked nervous, which was understandable. His plan had failed spectacularly, and the forensic evidence Marcus had compiled painted a clear picture of attempted fraud, computer crimes, and corporate sabotage. "Before we begin," Marcus said, placing a thick folder on the table, "I want everyone to understand something. I didn't ask for this meeting because I want my job back. I asked for it because what happened here goes far beyond wrongful termination." He opened the folder and began laying out printed logs, system analyses, and timeline comparisons. "8 days ago, I was fired without cause or warning. What I didn't know at the time was that the termination request came not from Janet, but from Brad Hutchins, who saw an opportunity to advance his career by removing someone he viewed as an obstacle." Janet's face had gone pale. "Brad, is this true?" Brad started to speak, but Marcus continued. "What happened next was that Brad attempted to frame me for cyber attacks on the company. He used my credentials, which he had access to as a systems administrator, to create the appearance that I was seeking revenge. The plan was elegant: discredit the former employee while creating a crisis he could solve to prove his worth." "This is ridiculous," Brad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus is obviously bitter about being fired. He's making up conspiracy theories." Marcus smiled grimly. "The forensic evidence tells a different story, Brad. Every attack originated from your workstation, routed through VPN connections that masked the source IP but left digital fingerprints in the system logs. You copied my credentials, but you couldn't replicate my coding style or my knowledge of the system architecture. The attacks were competent but crude, exactly what you'd expect from someone with 18 months of experience trying to impersonate someone with 7 years." He slid a printed report across the table. "More importantly, you made a critical error. When you tried to exploit the vulnerabilities you'd created, you triggered automatic backup systems that I'd installed years ago, systems that you didn't know existed, which logged every action with timestamps and biometric data from the office security cameras." Janet was staring at Brad with an expression of dawning horror. "My God, Brad. What have you done?" "The question isn't what he's done," Marcus said quietly. "The question is what you're all going to do about it." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Sarah Kim from HR spoke up. "Marcus, what do you want?" "I want Brad arrested for computer fraud and corporate sabotage. I want my reputation cleared publicly. I want a formal apology from the company acknowledging wrongful termination. And I want Brad to personally explain to Morrison Industries and every other client who was affected exactly what he did and why." "And if we agree to all of that?" Janet asked. Marcus stood up, gathering his papers. "Then I might consider not filing criminal charges against the company for allowing an employee to commit federal crimes using corporate resources." The aftermath moved quickly. Brad Hutchins was terminated immediately and faced federal cybercrime charges within the week. The local news stations ran follow-up stories about how the potential data breach had actually been an inside job. Pinnacle Solutions issued a public statement clearing Marcus's name and acknowledging that the attacks had been perpetrated by a rogue employee. More satisfying than any of that, though, were the phone calls that began flooding in from competing firms. Word had spread through the tech community about the architect who'd single-handedly prevented a major security catastrophe at his former company, even after being wrongfully terminated. Marcus's reputation hadn't just been restored, it had been enhanced. Data Secure Industries called this morning, Sarah told him over breakfast on Friday. They're offering you a senior architect position with a 40% raise and full remote work flexibility. Marcus smiled, watching Emma practice piano in the living room. What did you tell them? I told them you'd get back to them after you finish evaluating your other offers. 3 weeks later, Marcus started his new position as Chief Security Architect at Data Secure Industries. His first project was designing security protocols for a major financial services client, Morrison Industries, who'd specifically requested that he lead their implementation. Janet Winters was demoted and transferred to a regional office. Tony Rivera got promoted to lead developer. And Pinnacle Solutions spent the next 6 months dealing with client departures, regulatory investigations, and a reputation that would take years to rebuild. But Marcus didn't spend much time thinking about Pinnacle Solutions anymore. He had a new career, a restored reputation, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, justice prevailed in the corporate world. The only revenge worth having, he'd learned, was the kind where you didn't have to compromise your principles to achieve it. Sometimes the best way to get back at those who wronged you was simply to be better than they ever imagined you could be. And if that left them begging for your return, well, that was just a bonus.